I have read, most reverend fathers, in the ancient writings of the Arabians, that Abdallah the Saracen, on being asked what, on this stage of the world, as it were, seemed to him most worthy of wonder, replied that there was nothing to be seen more marvellous than man. This sentiment is supported by that celebrated exclamation of Hermes Trismegistus, "A great miracle is man," Asclepius. Yet, as I reflected upon the basis for these estimations, I was not satisfied by the many reasons that have been advanced for the preeminence of human nature. That man is the intermediary between creatures, that he is the intimate of the gods above him, as he is the lord of the beings beneath him, that, by the acuteness of his senses, the inquiry of his reason, and the light of his intelligence, he is the interpreter of nature, set midway between unchanging timelessness and the flux of time, that he is the living union and, as the Persians say, the marriage hymn of the world, and, by David's testimony, but little lower than the angels. These reasons are all, without question, of great weight, but they do not touch the principal grounds, those, that is, which justify man's claim to highest admiration. Why should we not admire the angels themselves and the most blessed heavenly choirs more? At last, however, I feel that I have come to some understanding of why man is the most fortunate of living things and, consequently, most deserving of all admiration, of what may be the condition in the hierarchy of beings assigned to him, a condition which attracts the envy not only of the brutes, but even of the astral beings and of the intelligences that dwell beyond the confines of our world, a thing that surpasses belief and smites the soul with wonder. Why should it not be thus? For it is on this ground that man is rightly and justifiably considered and called a great miracle and most admirable being. Hear then, fathers, precisely what this condition is of man, and, as befits your humanity, grant me your benign audition as I pursue this theme. God the Father, the supreme architect, had already built this world we see, the cosmic dwelling of divinity, a temple most august, according to the precepts of his hidden wisdom. He had adorned the super-celestial region with intelligences, infused the heavenly globes with the life of immortal souls, and set the fermenting dung-heap of the inferior world teeming with every animal form. But when his work was done, the artist longed for someone who would comprehend the meaning of so great an achievement, who might be moved with love for its beauty, and stand in awe at its magnitude. Therefore, when all else had been completed, as both Moses and Timaeus testify, he at last bethought himself of making man. But, in truth, there remained no archetype from which to fashion a new offspring, nor did his treasure house hold anything that would befit a new son as inheritance, nor was there a seat in the whole world from which disposed this son could contemplate the universe. All was replete, everything had been distributed unto the highest, middle, and the lowest orders. Still, the Father's power was not to fail in this, his last creation, nor would his supreme wisdom waver now for lack of counsel in a needful matter, nor would the kindness of his love permit that he compel a creature destined to praise his divine generosity in all other things to find it wanting in himself. At last, the Supreme Maker decreed that this creature, to whom he could give nothing wholly his own, should have a share in what was particular to every other creature. Therefore he took man, this work of indeterminate image, and set him in the middle of the world, and spoke to him thus: Neither a fixed abode, nor a face of thine own, nor any endowment particular to thee have we given thee, O Adam, so that by thine own judgment and decision thou mayst have and possess whatever place, whatever form, whatever gifts thou dost desire. The nature of all other creatures is defined and restricted within laws which we have laid down. Thou, impeded by no restrictions, according to thine own free will, in whose hand we have placed thee, shalt define thyself. We have put thee at the centre of the world, so that from there thou mayst with ease observe around thee all that is contained in the world. We have made thee a creature, neither of heaven nor of earth, neither mortal nor immortal, so that, with freedom, honour, and pride, as maker and moulder of thyself, thou mayst fashion thyself in whatsoever form thou dost prefer. It shall be in thy power to descend to the lower brutish forms of life. Thou shalt be able, by thy soul's judgment, to rise again to the superior orders which are divine. O unsurpassed generosity of God the Father! O wondrous and unsurpassable felicity of man, to whom it is granted to have whatever he chooses, to be whatever he wills to be. Dumb creatures, as soon as they are born, bring with them, as Lucilius says, from their mother's womb all that they will ever possess. The highest spiritual beings, from the very beginning or soon thereafter, are what they forever will be, in eternity. But upon man, at the moment of his creation, God has bestowed seeds pregnant with all possibilities, the germs of every form of life. Whichever of these a man shall cultivate, the same will mature and bear fruit in him. If vegetative, he will become a plant. If sensual, he will become brutish. If rational, he will reveal himself a heavenly being. If intellectual, he will be an angel and the Son of God. And if, not content with the lot of any other creature, he recollects himself into the centre of his own unity, he will there become one spirit with God, in the solitary mist of the Father, who is set above all things, and so transcend all creatures. Who would not admire this, our chameleon? Or who look with greater admiration on any other being? This creature man, who Asclepius the Athenian, on account of this mutability, this nature capable of transforming itself, quite rightly said, was symbolized in the mysteries by the figure of Proteus. This is the source of those celebrated metamorphoses among the Hebrews and the Pythagoreans. Even the esoteric theology of the Hebrews at times transforms the holy Enoch into that angel of divinity called Malak HaShekinah, and at times transforms others into other powers. The Pythagoreans transform men guilty of crimes into brutes, or even, if we are to believe Empedocles, into plants. And Mohammed, imitating them, was known frequently to say that the man who deserts the divine law becomes a beast, and rightly so. For it is not the bark that makes the tree, but its insensitive, senseless nature, nor the hide which makes the beast of burden, but its dumb and sensual soul, nor the orbicular form which makes the heavens, but their harmonious order, nor is it freedom from a body that makes the angel, but spiritual intelligence. If you see one dedicated to his stomach, crawling on the ground, you see a plant, not a man. If you see one bedazzled by the empty forms of the imagination, as by the wiles of Calypso, and enticed by their allure made slave to his senses, it is a beast you see, not a man. If, however, you see a philosopher, discerning all things by pure reason, him you shall revere, for he is a creature of heaven and not of earth. If, finally, you encounter a pure contemplator, unconcerned with the body, wholly withdrawn into the inner chambers of the mind, here indeed is a creature neither of earth nor of heaven, but an august divinity clothed in human flesh. Who then will not admire man, who in the sacred mosaic and Christian writings, and not without reason, is designated sometimes by the term all flesh, and sometimes by the term every creature, because he moulds, fashions, and transforms himself into the likeness of all flesh, and assumes the character of every creature. This is why Ivantes the Persian, in his exposition of the Chaldean theology, writes that man has no inborn semblance of his own, but many, which are extraneous and adventitious to him, whence the Chaldean saying, Enush hushinujim vekama tepaothaj, man is a living creature of varied, multiform, and ever-changing nature. Wherefore all this? So that, having been born into this condition of becoming what we wish to be, we may understand the need to take greatest care that it may never be said against us that we failed to appreciate this privileged position we were born into, but descended instead to the state of dull, incipient beasts of burden. So that rather the saying of Asper the prophet be true, you are all gods and sons of the Most High, and so that we may not, by abusing the generosity of a most indulgent Father, pervert the free choice he has given us, and turn noxious his salutary gift. Let a sacred ambition invade our souls, so that, impatient with mediocrity, we strive after the highest, and, since if we will we can, bend all our efforts to its attainment. Let us disdain things of the earth, disregard even things celestial, and, putting behind us everything that is of this world, hasten to that court beyond the world, closest to the most exalted divinity. There, as the sacred mysteries tell us, the seraphim, cherubim, and thrones hold the first places. Let us, unable to yield to them and impatient with any secondary place, emulate their dignity and glory. If we wanted this, we should be inferior to them in nothing. But how go about this, and what to do? Let us observe what they do, what kind of life they lead. For if we lead their kind of life, as we can, we shall equal their fortune. The seraph burns with the fire of charity. From the cherub shines the splendour of intelligence. The throne stands firm with steadfast justice. If, therefore, in the pursuit of the active life we govern inferior things by just criteria, we shall be established in the firm position of the thrones. If, freeing ourselves from active care, we devote our time to contemplation, meditating upon the Creator in His creation, and the creation in its Creator, we shall be resplendent with the light of the cherubim. If we burn with love for the Creator only, his consuming fire will quickly transform us into the flaming likeness of the seraphim. Above the throne, that is the just judge, sits God, judge of the ages. Above the cherub, that is the contemplative spirit, he flies, nourishing him, as it were, by watching over him. For the Spirit of the Lord moves upon the waters, those waters which are above the firmament, and which, according to Job, praise the Lord in hymns before dawn. Whosoever is a seraph, that is, a lover, is in God, and God is in him, and indeed God and he are one. Great is the power of the thrones which we attain by judgment. Highest of all is the sublimity of the seraphim which we attain through love. But how can anyone judge or love what he does not know? Moses loved God whom he saw, and as judge of his people he administered what he had first seen in contemplation on the mountain. Therefore, the cherub is the intermediary, and by his light he prepares us equally for the fire of the seraphim and the judgment of the thrones. This is the bond of the foremost minds, the Palladian order which presides over contemplative philosophy, the bond which before all else we must emulate, embrace, and comprehend, the bond whence we may be rapt to the heights of love, or descend, well instructed and prepared, to the duties of practical life. But truly it is worth the effort, if our life is to be modelled on the example of the cherubic life, to have before our eyes and hold as currency both its nature and its quality, as well as the deeds and works of the cherubs. Since it is not granted us, flesh as we are and knowledgeable only in things of the earth, to attain this by our own efforts, let us approach the ancient fathers who, conversant and familiar with these matters, can give us the fullest and most reliable testimony concerning them. Let us consult the Apostle Paul, the chosen vessel, in what activity he saw the host of cherubim engaged when he was rapt into the third heaven. He will answer, according to the interpretation of Dionysius, that he saw them first being purified, then illuminated, and finally made perfect. We, therefore, emulating the life of the cherubim here on earth, may, by taming the impulses of our passions with moral science, by dispelling the darkness of reason with dialectic, washing away, as it were, the filth of ignorance and vice, likewise purify our soul so that our passions may not run rampant, nor our reason through rashness be deranged. Then may we suffuse our purified soul with the light of natural philosophy, perfecting it with the knowledge of things divine. And, lest we let those of our own faith suffice, let us also consult the patriarch Jacob, whose likeness carved on the throne of glory shines out before us. Sleeping in the lower world, but keeping watch on the world above, this wisest of the fathers will admonish us. But he will admonish us in a figure, as all things came to those men. A ladder rises from the bottom of the earth to the highest of heavens, divided into a series of many rungs, with the Lord seated at the summit, and angels in contemplation ascending and descending across them in turns. If this is what we, aspiring to the angelic life, must do, I ask, who would set muddied feet or soiled hands to the ladder of the Lord? It is forbidden, as the mysteries teach, for the impure to touch what is pure. But what are these hands? What these feet? Surely the foot of the soul is its most contemptible part, by which the soul is held fast to the earth as a root to the ground. I mean its nourishing and feeding power, the kindler of lust, the teacher of voluptuous softness. And why should we not call the hand of the soul its irascible power, the warrior of desire, fighting for it and foraging for it in the dust and the sun, seizing for it what it will devour, drowsy in the shade? These hands, those feet, that is the whole sensual part in which the allure of the body resides, and which, as the saying goes, holds the soul by the scruff of the neck, lest we be flung back from that ladder as profane and polluted intruders, let us bathe them in moral philosophy as in a living stream. Even this, however, will not be enough if we wish to be the companions of angels moving up and down Jacob's ladder, unless we are first instructed and made fit to be promoted duly from one step to the next, never to stray from the ladder, and to engage in the alternating comings and goings. Once we have been thus prepared by the art of discourse and of reason, then, inspired by the cherubic spirit, exercising philosophy through the rungs of the ladder that is of nature, and penetrating all things from centre to centre, we shall sometime descend, dismembering with titanic force the unity of the many, like the members of Osiris, and sometimes we shall ascend with the power of Phoebus, collecting the members like those of Osiris into unity, until, at last, resting in the bosom of the Father who reigns above the ladder, we shall find perfection and peace in the felicity of theology. Let us also inquire of Job the just, who made his covenant of life with God even before he himself entered into life. What God the highest desires most of the tens of hundreds of thousands who attend him? Peace, he will answer, without a doubt, as it is written in his own pages, he maketh peace in his high places. And since the middle order interprets for the lower orders the precepts of the higher order, let the words of Job the theologian be interpreted for us by Empedocles the philosopher. Empedocles teaches us that there is in our souls a dual nature. By the one part we are raised up toward the heavenly regions, by the other thrust down to the lower world through discord and friendship, war and peace, as testify his verses. In these he laments that, torn by strife and discord, he is driven into the depth of the sea like a madman fugitive from the gods. Surely, fathers, multiple forces strive within us in grave internal warfare worse than the civil wars of states. If we are to overcome this, if we aspire to that peace which lifts us to the sublime, so we may be established among the exalted of God, only philosophy can curb and allay in us that strife. In the first place, if our man seeks just a truce with his enemies, moral philosophy will restrain the unbridled sallies of the Protean brute and the passionate violence and wrath of the lion within us. If we then consult with ourselves to seek an everlasting, secure peace, moral philosophy will be at hand to freely fulfill our desires. And, having slain both beasts like sacrificed sows, it will establish an inviolable compact of holiest peace between flesh and spirit. Dialectic will settle the tumults of a reason that is torn by anxiety and uncertainty amid inconsistent statements and syllogistical sophisms. Natural philosophy will settle the conflict of opinion and the quarrels which vex, distract, and lacerate the disturbed mind from all sides. But she will settle this conflict such as to remind us that nature, as Heraclitus wrote, is generated by war, and for this reason is called by Homer strife. She cannot therefore grant us a true and unshakable peace. Doing so is the privilege and office of her mistress, most holy theology. She will show us the way and lead us to her, who, seeing us hasten towards her from afar, will call out, "Come unto me, ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you." So soothingly summoned, and invited with such kindness, we shall fly on winged feet like earthly Mercuries to the embrace of the most blessed Mother, and there enjoy the peace we have longed for, that most holy peace, that indivisible union, that seamless friendship through which all souls will not only be at one in that one mind which is above all minds, but in an ineffable way will completely be one. This is the friendship which the Pythagoreans say is the purpose of all philosophy. This is the peace which God established in the high places of the heaven, and which the angels, descending to earth, announced to men of goodwill, so that men, ascending through this peace to heaven, might become angels. This is the peace that we would choose for our friends, for our age, for every house into which we enter, and for our own soul, so that through this peace she may become the dwelling of God, and so that when she shall have purged herself of her uncleanness by means of moral philosophy and dialectic, adorned herself with the disciplines of philosophy as with the raiment of a prince's court, and crowned the pediments of her doors with the garlands of theology, the King of glory may descend and, coming with the Father, take up his abode with her. If she, our soul, prove worthy of so great a guest, she will, by his boundless compassion, arrayed in the golden vesture of the many sciences as in a nuptial gown, receive him not as a guest merely, but as a spouse. And rather than be parted from him, she will prefer to leave her own people, and, forgetting her father's house and herself, she will desire to die to herself in order to live in her spouse, in whose sight surely the death of his saints is precious. I say death, if we must call death the fullness of life, whose contemplation wise men have always held to be the study of philosophy. Let us also cite Moses himself, who is but little removed from the living wellspring of the most holy and ineffable intelligence, on whose nectar the angels are inebriated. Let us listen to the venerable judge as he proclaims his laws to us, who live in this desert loneliness of the body. Let those who, still unclean, have need of moral philosophy, dwell with the peoples outside the tabernacles, under the open sky, until, like the priests of Thessaly, they shall have cleansed themselves. Those who have already brought order into their lives may be received into the tabernacle, but still may not touch the sacred vessels. Let them first, as zealous Levites in the service of dialectic, minister to the holy offices of philosophy. When they have been admitted to these, they may, as priests of philosophy, now behold the many-coloured throne of the higher God. That is the courtly palace of the star-hung heavens, the heavenly candelabrum divided into 7 lights, and the skin-made elements, so that finally, having been permitted to enter into the innermost chambers of the temple through the merit of sublime theology, and with no image veil interceding, they may enjoy the glory of divinity. This surely is what Moses commands us, and in commanding he admonishes, urges and exhorts us to prepare for ourselves, by means of philosophy, while we can, a road to future heavenly glory. But indeed, not only the Mosaic and Christian mysteries, but also the theology of the ancients throw us the benefit and the dignity of the liberal arts, of which I am about to speak. What else could be the meaning of the stages of the initiates observed in the mysteries of the Greeks? They were granted admission to these mysteries, having first been purified by what we might call the expiatory arts, moral philosophy, and dialectic. What could be the meaning of such an admission other than the interpretation of occult nature by means of philosophy? Then, at length, those who had been prepared in this way arrived at epopteia, that is, the sight of things divine by the light of theology. Who would not long to be initiated into such sacred rites? Who would not desire, putting all human concerns behind him, holding in contempt the goods of fortune and neglecting those of the body, to become, while still a denizen of earth, a guest at the table of the gods, and, drunk with the nectar of eternity, receive the gift of immortality while still mortal? Who would not wish to be so inspired by those Socratic frenzies of which Plato sings in the Phaedrus, that, awed by feet and wings, at speed fleeing hence, that is, from this world set on evil, he might reach the heavenly Jerusalem by the most rapid course? Let us be driven, fathers, let us be driven by those Socratic frenzies which take us out of our minds and put our minds and ourselves in God. Let us be driven by them if we have first done everything that is in us to do. If, by moral philosophy, the power of our passions have been reined in a fitting agreement, so that they can sing together in harmonious accord, and if by dialectic our reason has progressed in a measured tact, then, stirred by the frenzy of the Muses, we shall drink the heavenly harmony with our innermost hearing. Then the leader of the Muses, Bacchus, showing us who study philosophy the invisible things of God through his mysteries, that is, the visible signs of nature, will make us drunk with the richness of the house of God, and there, if, like Moses, we prove faithful, most sacred theology will come to inspire us with redoubled frenzy. For, exalted to her most eminent height, wherefrom we shall be able to measure all things that are, that shall be, and that have been in indivisible eternity, and beholding their primordial beauty, we shall, like the seers of Phoebus, become her winged lovers. And at last, smitten by ineffable love as by a sting, and like burning seraphim filled with power, we shall be no longer ourselves, but become he himself who made us. The sacred names of Apollo, to anyone who penetrates their meanings and the mysteries they conceal, suffice to show that God is a philosopher no less than a seer. But since Simonius has amply treated this theme, there is no occasion for me to expound it anew. But fathers, we cannot fail to recall 3 Delphic precepts, which are so very necessary for everyone about to enter the most holy and august temple, not of the false, but of the true Apollo, who illumines every soul as it enters this world. You will see that they exhort us to nothing else but to embrace with all our powers this tripartite philosophy which we are now discussing. In fact, that aphorism meden agan, that is, nothing in excess, well describes a measure and rule for all the virtues through the concept of the mean with which moral philosophy deals. In like manner, that other aphorism, gnotis seauton, that is, know thyself, invites and exhorts us to the study of all nature, of which the nature of man is both the connecting link and the mixed potion, so to speak. For he who knows himself knows all things in himself, as Zoroaster wrote, and thereafter Plato in the Alcibiades. Finally, when, enlightened in this knowledge by natural philosophy and already close to God, we employ the theological salutation A, that is, Thou art, we shall accordingly address the true Apollo blissfully on intimate terms. Let us also seek the opinion of Pythagoras, that wisest of men, wise especially because he never deemed himself worthy of that name. His first precept to us will be never to sit on a bushel, never, that is, through slothful inaction to lose our power of reason, that faculty by which the mind examines, judges, and measures all things, but rather to direct and stimulate it unremittingly by the rule and exercise of dialectic. Next, he will point out to us two things to be particularly aware of: neither to pass water facing the sun, nor to cut our nails while offering sacrifice. Only when, by moral philosophy, we have evacuated the lax appetites of our too abundant pleasures and pared away, like nail clippings, the sharp points of anger and wrath in our souls, shall we finally begin to take part in the sacred rites, that is, the mysteries of Bacchus of which we have spoken, and dedicate ourselves to that contemplation of which the Son is rightly called the Father and the Guide. Finally, Pythagoras will enjoin us to feed the cock, that is, to nourish the divine part of our soul with the knowledge of things divine, as with substantial food and heavenly ambrosia. This is the cock at whose sight the lion, that is, all earthly power, trembles in fear and stands in awe. This is the cock to whom, as we read in Job, all understanding was given. At this cock's crowing, erring man returns to his senses. This is the cock which daily in the morning twilight joins with the morning stars to sing the praises of God. This is the cock which Socrates, at the hour of his death, when he hoped he was about to join the divinity of his spirit to the divinity of the higher world, said he owed to Asclepius, that is, the healer of souls, now that he had passed beyond all danger of illness. Let us review also the records of the Chaldeans. There we shall see, if they are to be believed, that the road to happiness for mortals stretches out through the same arts. The Chaldean interpreters write that it was a saying of Zoroaster that the soul is winged, and when her wings fall from her, she plunges into the body. Then, when they grow strong again, she flies back to heaven. When his disciples asked him how their soul's wings might become well feathered, he replied, "Water them well with the waters of life." And when they persisted, asking where they might obtain these waters, he answered, as was the man's custom, in a parable. The paradise of God is bathed and watered by 4 rivers. From these same sources may you draw the waters which will save you. The name of the river which flows from the north is Pishon, which means the right. That which flows from the west is Gihon, that is expiation. The river flowing from the east is named Kidekel, that is light, while that finally from the south is Perath, which may be understood as piety. Turn your attention, fathers, to a diligent consideration of what these teachings of Zoroaster might mean. Surely nothing other than that we should wash the uncleanness from our eyes by moral science, as by the western waves, that by dialectic, as by a reading taken from the northern star, we should align our gaze with the right, Then that in the contemplation of nature we should become accustomed to bear the still feeble light of truth, like the first rays of the rising sun, so that we finally may, through theological piety and the most holy worship of God, become able, like the eagles of heaven, to bear the most effulgent splendour of the meridian sun. These are, perhaps, those morning, midday, and evening thoughts which David first celebrated and on which St. Augustine later expatiated. This is the noonday light which inflames the seraphim toward their goal and equally illuminates the cherubim. This is the promised land toward which our ancient father Abram was ever advancing. This is the region where, as the teaching of the Kabbalists and the Moors tell us, there is no place for unclean spirits. And if we may be permitted, even in the form of a riddle, to say anything publicly about the deeper mysteries, since the precipitous fall from heaven has condemned man's mind to dizziness, and, according to Jeremiah, death is come up into our windows to infect our liver and our hearts with evil, let us call upon Raphael, the heavenly healer, so that by moral philosophy and dialectic, as with healing drugs, he may release us. Then, when we are restored to health, Gabriel, the strength of God, will abide in us, leading us through the miracles of nature and pointing out to us everywhere the power and the goodness of God. He will deliver us finally to the care of the high priest Michael, who will adorn those who have successfully completed their service to philosophy with the priesthood of theology, as with a crown of precious stones. These are the reasons, most reverend fathers, which not only inspired, but compelled me to the study of philosophy. I should certainly not have undertaken to expound them, were it not in reply to those who are wont to condemn the study of philosophy, especially among men of high rank, but also among those of ordinary station. For the whole study of philosophy, such is the unhappy plight of our time, is now subject to contempt and abuse, rather than honour and glory. The deadly and monstrous persuasion has invaded almost all minds that philosophy ought not to be studied at all, or by very few people, as though it were of little worth to have before our eyes and at our fingertips, explored with the greatest care, the causes of things, the ways of nature, and the plan of the universe, God's counsels, and the mysteries of heaven and earth, unless from it one might curry some favour or gain some profit for oneself. Thus we have reached the point, alas, where the only people deemed wise are those who can reduce the pursuit of wisdom to a profitable business, and chaste Pallas, who dwells among men by the generosity of the gods, is rejected, hooted and whistled at in scorn, with no one to love or befriend her, unless by prostituting herself she can pay back into the coffers of her lover the ill-gained wages of her tarnished virginity. I say all this, and not without the deepest grief and indignation at our times, not to the princes, but to the philosophers who believe and assert that philosophy should not be pursued because no fee or reward is assigned it, unaware that by this sign they show that they are not philosophers. Since their whole life is concentrated on gain and ambition, they never embrace knowledge of the truth for its own sake. This much I will say for myself, and on this point I do not blush for praising myself, that I have never practised philosophy save for the sake of philosophy, nor have I ever desired or hoped to secure from my studies and lucubrations any profit or fruit, save the cultivation of my mind and knowledge of the truth, things I have always most desired. So eager have I been for this, and so enamoured of it, that I have set aside all private and public concerns to devote myself completely to contemplation, and from it no disparagement of the jealous, nor any invective from enemies of wisdom have ever been, nor ever will be, able to deter me. Philosophy herself has taught me to rely on my own conscience rather than on the judgments of others, and to worry less that I hear no evil said against me than that I myself should speak and do no evil. For my part, I was not unaware, most reverend fathers, that this present disputation of mine would be as acceptable and as pleasing to you who favour the good arts and who have consented to grace it with your presence, as it would be irritating and offensive to many others. I am also aware that there is no dearth of those who have condemned my undertaking before now, and who continue to do so on a number of grounds. It has ever been thus. Works that are well-intentioned and sincerely directed toward virtue have no fewer, so as not to say more, detractors than those undertaken for questionable motives and to devious ends. There are those who disapprove of this type of disputation in general, and of the institution of public debate about learned matters, maintaining that these serve only the exhibition of talent and the display of opinion rather than the increase of learning. There are those who do not disapprove of this type of practice, but who in no way approve it in me, who, at this age, born a mere 24 years ago, have dared to propose a disputation concerning the lofty mysteries of Christian theology, the highest topics of philosophy, and unfamiliar branches of learning, in this most celebrated of cities, before a large assembly of most learned men, in the presence of the Apostolic Senate. Still others cede my right so to dispute, but do not concede that I may dispute 900 theses, and disparage that such a project is as superfluous and ambitious as it is beyond my powers. I should have acceded to these objections willingly and immediately, if the philosophy which I profess had so instructed me, and I should not now undertake to respond to them as she teaches me, if I believed this discussion between us to be undertaken for the purposes of quarrel and vituperation. Therefore, let all intention to disparage and to exasperate be purged from our minds, and also malice, of which Plato writes that it is ever absent from the heavenly choir. Let us amicably find out whether it is for me to debate, and whether it is for me to debate such a large number of questions. Firstly, I shall not have much to say against those who disparage this type of public disputation, as it is a crime, if it be a crime, that I share with you all most excellent doctors who have engaged in this practice on many occasions, and not without the highest praise and glory, as well as with Plato and Aristotle and all the most esteemed philosophers of every age. They were most certain that nothing would profit them more in their search for wisdom than to take part in the exercise of public debate as often as they could. Just as the powers of the body are made stronger through gymnastic, so the powers of the mind grow in strength and vigour in this gymnasium of letters, so to speak. Nor can I believe that the poets, when they sang of the arms of Pallas, and the Hebrews, when they called the barzel, the sword, the symbol of wise men, could signify anything other to us than how necessary this most honest type of contest is for the acquisition of knowledge. This may be the reason why the Chaldeans, in the horoscope of one destined to be a philosopher, desired that Mars and Mercury should face each other in the trine aspect, as much as to say, should these assemblies and these contests be abandoned, all philosophy would become sluggish and drowsy. It is more difficult for me, however, to find a line of defence against those who tell me that I am unequal to the undertaking. If I say that I am equal to it, I shall appear to entertain an immodestly high opinion of myself. If I admit that I am unequal to it, I shall risk being called temerarious and imprudent. See what straits I have fallen into, the position in which I am placed. I cannot, without censure, promise something about myself that I then cannot fail to deliver without censure. Perhaps I may invoke that saying of Job, "There is a spirit in man," and here with Timothy, "Let no man despise thy youth." But from my own conscience, I might say more truthfully that there is nothing great or singular about me. I admit that I am devoted to study and eager in the pursuit of the good arts, but nevertheless I do not assume nor arrogate to myself the title learned. If then I have taken such a great burden on my shoulders, it is not because I am ignorant of my own weaknesses, but because I knew that in this kind of contest, that is a literary one, there lies a special profit in being defeated. Even the weakest, therefore, ought not to shun them, but by right should seek them out. For he who succumbs receives from the victor not an injury, but a benefit. He returns to his house richer than he left, that is, more learned and better armed for future contests. Inspired by such hope, though myself but a weak soldier, I have not been afraid to enter so dangerous a contest even against the strongest and most vigorous opponents. Whether in this I have acted foolishly or not, at any rate, be better judged from the outcome of the contest than from my age. It remains for me, in the third place, to answer those who are offended by the large number of propositions I have put forward and the variety of topics, as if the burden, however great it may be, rested on their shoulders and not, as it does, on mine alone. Surely it is unbecoming and exceedingly captious to wish to set limits to another's efforts, and, as Cicero says, to desire mediocrity in matters where the rule should be the more the merrier. In so great a venture it was necessary for me to either satisfy or to fail entirely. Should I satisfy, I do not see how this would be more praiseworthy for defending 10 theses than defending 900. Should I fail, they who hate me will have grounds to impugn me, those who love me to forgive. Because in so grave, so large a matter, the failure of a young man with but a slender talent and want of learning deserves indulgence rather than censure. For, as the poet says, if powers fail, there shall be praise for daring, and to have wished for great things is enough. In our own day, many scholars, imitating Gorgias of Leontini, have been wont to dispute, and not without praise, not 900 questions only, but the whole range of questions concerning all the arts. Why should not I then, without guilt, be allowed to discuss questions indeed large in number, but also fixed and defined? This is superfluous, they say, and ambitious. I contend that, in my case, it is not superfluous, but in fact necessary. That if they consider with me the purpose of philosophy, they will feel compelled, even against their inclinations, to recognize that it is plainly necessary. Those who devote themselves to one or another of the schools of philosophy, Thomas, for instance, or Socrates, who at present enjoy the widest following, can indeed test their doctrine in the discussion of a few questions. I, by contrast, have so prepared myself that, committed to the teachings of no one man, I have ranged through all the masters of philosophy, examined all their works, become acquainted with all schools. Therefore, I had to speak of all of them, lest, defending a doctrine particular to one, I might seem committed to it, and thus to deprecate the rest. And while a few of these theses proposed concerned individual philosophers, it was inevitable that a great number should concern all of them together. And let no one condemn me for being a guest whithersoever the wind may blow me. For it was a custom observed by the ancients in their pursuit of studying all kinds of writers, never to leave unread any commentaries that might be available, especially so by Aristotle, whom Plato therefore called awagnoies, that is, the reader. And it is certainly narrow-minded to confine oneself within one porch or academy. Nor can anyone reasonably select one out of them all for himself without first having familiarized himself with them all. And add to this that there is in each school some distinctive characteristic which it does not share with any other. So, to begin with the men of our own faith, to whom philosophy came last, there is in John Scotus something vigorous and subtle, in Thomas something solid and balanced, in Egidius succinct and exact, in Francis penetrating and acute, in Albert venerable, copious and grand, in Henry, as it seems to me, always something august and sublime. Among the Arabians there is in Averroes something solid and unshaken, in Avempace, in Alfarabi, something serious and thoughtful, in Avicenna divine and Platonic. Among the Greeks, philosophy was universally brilliant and, above all, chaste. In Simplicius it is rich and abundant, in Themistius elegant and compendious, in Alexander learned and consistent, in Theophrastus gravely elaborated, in Ammonius agreeable and smooth. And if you turn to the Platonists, to examine but a few, you will in Porphyry be delighted by the wealth of material and the complexity of religion. In Iamblichus you will be awed by his knowledge of occult philosophy and the mysteries of the East. And in Plotinus you will not admire one single thing, because he is admirable in every aspect. Platonists themselves, sweating over his pages, scarcely understand him when, in his oblique learned speech, he teaches things divinely, and far more than humanly, things human. I shall pass over the more recent figures, Proclus luxuriating in Asiatic fertility, and those who emanate from him, Damascius, Olympiodorus, and several others in whom that toteion, that is, the divine, which is the distinctive mark of the Platonists, always shines through. Add to this that any school of thought which attacks the more established truths and by clever slander makes fun of good causes confirms rather than diminishes the truth, which, like embers, is fanned to life rather than extinguished by agitation. These are the reasons that have motivated me in my determination to put before the public the doctrine not of a single school, which would have pleased certain people, but of all schools, so that, in the comparison of several schools and the discussion of manifold philosophies, that effulgence of truth which Plato mentions in his epistles might, like the sun rising from the sea, dawn on our minds more brightly. What would be the gain if only Latin philosophy, that is Albert, Thomas, Scotus, Egidius, Francis, and Henry were drawn on, while that of the Greeks and the Arabs was passed over, when all wisdom flowed from the East to the Greeks and from the Greeks to us? Thus our thinkers have always been satisfied in the field of philosophy to stand on the discoveries of foreigners and to perfect the work of others. What profit would have derived from discussing natural philosophy with the Peripatetics if the Platonic Academy had not also been invited? For the doctrine of the latter, even when it touched on divine matters, has always, as St. Augustine bears witness, been esteemed as the most hallowed of all philosophies. And now I have, for the first time in many centuries, as far as I know, may no one begrudge my saying so, brought it to the examination of public disputation. What were it to have discussed the opinions of others, no matter how many, if, like a symboli at the banquet of wise men, we should contribute nothing of our own, nothing that was conceived and elaborated from our own ingenuity? Indeed, it is ignoble, as Seneca writes, to have knowledge only from notebooks, as though the discoveries of those who preceded us had closed the path to our own efforts, as though the power of nature had turned effete in us and was able to bring forth nothing that could, if not demonstrate the truth, then at least point toward it from afar. If the farmer hates sterility in his field and the husband in his wife, then certainly the divine mind, joined and associated with a sterile soul, will hate it all the more, as from it a much nobler offspring is desired. For these reasons I have not contented myself with adding to well-worn doctrines many points of the early theology of Hermes Trismegistus, many theses drawn from the teachings of the Chaldeans and of Pythagoras, and many secret occult mysteries of the Hebrews, but I have also proposed for discussion a considerable number of theses concerning both nature and God, which we ourselves have discovered and studied. First, we have proposed a harmony between Plato and Aristotle, such as many before us believed to exist, but which no one has satisfactorily proved. Boethius, among Latin writers, promised to do so, but there is no trace of his ever having done what he always wanted to do. Among the Greeks, Simplicius made the same declaration, and if only he had made good on his promise. St. Augustine also writes in his Contra Academicos that there was no lack of others who, with their most thorough arguments, attempted to prove the same thing, that the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle are certainly the same. John the Grammarian, likewise, while saying that Aristotle differed from Plato only for those who do not grasp Plato's words, still left it to posterity to prove this. We have added, moreover, several passages in which Scotus and Thomas, and several in which Averroes and Avicenna are supposed to disagree, where we assert that they agree. Secondly, along with our own reflections on both the Aristotelian and the Platonic philosophies, we have established 72 theses in physics and metaphysics with which, if I am not mistaken, and this will soon become clear to me, anyone who holds them will be able to resolve any question proposed to him in natural philosophy or theology on a principle far removed from any we are taught in the philosophy studied at the schools and cultivated by the doctors of this age. Nor ought anyone to be astonished, fathers, that I, in my early years, and at a tender age at which I should scarcely be allowed to read the writings of others, as some have taunted, should wish to produce a new philosophy. Rather, they ought to praise it if it is well defended, or condemn it if it is refuted. And finally, since it will be their task to judge my discoveries and my scholarship, they ought to look to the merit or demerit of these, and not to the age of their author. I have, furthermore, introduced as new another method of practicing philosophy based on numbers, which is in fact very old, for it was observed by the earliest theologians, especially by Pythagoras, but also by Aglaophamus, Philolaus, and Plato, as well as by the first Platonists. But, like other illustrious things, it has, through neglect by posterity, so faded that hardly any vestiges of it can now be found. Plato writes in the Epinomis that among all the liberal arts and contemplative sciences, the science of numbers is supreme and most divine. Likewise, asking why man is the wisest of animals, he replies, because he knows how to count. Aristotle, in his Problems, expresses the same opinion. Abu Mazar writes that it was a saying of Avenzoar of Babylon that he knows everything who knows how to count. These statements can in no way be true if, by the art of numbers, they mean the art in which today merchants, above all, are experts. To this Plato bears witness when he admonishes us emphatically not to confuse divine arithmetic with the arithmetic of merchants. I therefore, when after long nights of study I seemed to have penetrated this arithmetic so highly extolled, promised myself that in order to test the matter, I would try to publicly solve by means of numbers 74 questions which are considered among the most important in physics and divinity. We have also proposed theorems concerning magic, in which we have indicated that magic has two forms, one consisting entirely of the work and authority of demons, as God is my witness, an execrable and monstrous thing. The other, when properly explored, proves to be nothing else but the absolute realization of natural philosophy. The Greeks were aware of both these forms, but, in no way dignifying the former with the name magic, they called it goetheia, reserving the proper and characteristic term mageia for the latter to mean the highest and most perfect wisdom. For, according to Porphyry, the term magus in the Persian tongue means the same as divine interpreter and worshipper in ours. Moreover, fathers, great, indeed the greatest possible, is the disparity and dissimilarity between these arts. The former not only the Christian religion, but every legal code and well-governed state abhors and condemns. The latter, all wise men and all nations devoted to the study of heavenly and divine things embrace and approve. The former is the most deceitful of arts, the latter a higher and holier philosophy. The former vain and empty, the latter firm, solid, and satisfying. Whosoever enjoins with the former always dissembles, because it brings its author ignominy and shame. From the latter, the highest renown and glory of letters has come in ancient times and almost ever since. No philosopher eager to learn the good arts was ever a student of the former, but to learn the latter, Pythagoras, Empedocles, Democritus and Plato crossed the seas, then taught it when they returned home, and esteemed it before all others in their mysteries. The former, unsupported by reason, is defended by no writer of reputation. The latter, graced with its illustrious parents, as it were, has two principal authors, Samolsis, who was imitated by Abaris the Hyperborean, and Zoroaster, though not the one you may be thinking of, but he who is the son of Oromasius. If we were to ask Plato what each of the two is, he will respond in the Alcibiades that the magic of Zoroaster is nothing other than the divine science in which the kings of the Persians instructed their sons so that they might learn to rule their own commonwealth by the example of the commonwealth of the universe. In the Charmides, he will answer that the magic of Samolsis is the medicine of the soul, since it brings temperance to the soul, as medicine brings health to the body. Later, in their footsteps, Charondas, Damigeron, Apollonius, Ostanes, and Dardanus persevered. Homer persevered, of whom we shall sometime prove, in our poetic theology, to have concealed this wisdom in the wanderings of his Ulysses, just as he hid all others. Eudoxus and Hermippus persevered. Practically all who researched the Pythagorean and Platonic mysteries persevered. Moreover, from among the later philosophers, I discovered three who had got scent of it: the Arabian Al-Kindi, Roger Bacon, and William of Paris. Plotinus is also aware of it when he demonstrates that the magus is a minister of nature and not its contriver, This wisest of men approves and maintains this magic, and so abhors the other, that when he was called to rites of evil spirits, he said that they should come to him rather than he go to them, and rightly so. Much as the former makes man a slave and pawn to evil powers, the latter makes him their lord and master. The former, finally, cannot claim for itself the name of either art or science, while the latter, full of the highest mysteries, embraces the most profound contemplation of the deepest secrets, and at last the knowledge of all nature. The latter, in calling forth from their hiding places, as it were, into the light the powers which the kindness of God has sown and scattered in the world, does not so much work wonders as sedulously serve a wonder-working nature. The latter, scrutinizing to greater depth that harmony of the universe which the Greeks more meaningfully called sympatheia, recognizing the mutual nature of things and applying to each thing those inducements called yugas by the Magi, uniquely suited to its nature, brings into public view the miracles which lie hidden in the recesses of the world, in the womb of nature, in the storehouses and mysteries of God, just as though she herself were their maker. And as the farmer weds his elms to the vines, so the Magus unites earth to heaven, that is, the lower orders to the endowments and powers of the higher. So it is that the former shows itself to be monstrous and noxious, and the latter salutary and divine. Chief reason for this is that the former, delivering man to the enemies of God, calls him away from God, while the latter excites in him the admiration for the works of God, from which most certainly eagerly follow charity, faith, and hope. For nothing so moves us to religion and the worship of God as the assiduous contemplation of the miracles of God. And when we have examined them well, thanks to this natural magic, we shall more ardently be inspired to love and worship the Creator and be compelled to sing, "The heavens and all the earth are filled with the majesty of thy glory." And this is enough about magic, of which we have spoken here, because I know that there are many who, just as dogs always bark at strangers, condemn and hate what they do not understand. I come now to those matters which I have elicited from the ancient mysteries of the Hebrews, and here adduce in confirmation of the inviolable Catholic faith. Lest they be thought trivial fabrications and tinkers' tales by those to whom they are unfamiliar, I want everyone to understand what they are and what their true character is, whence they are drawn, by what illustrious writers they are confirmed, how mysterious, how divine, and how necessary they are to men of our faith for the defence of our religion against the persistent objections of the Hebrews. Not only famous Hebrew teachers, but also, from amongst our own, Esdras, Hilary, and Oration write that Moses received on the mount from God not just the law, which he left to posterity written down in 5 books, but also a more secret and true explanation of the law. And they say that God indeed commanded him to make the law known to the people, but not to commit the law's interpretation to letters or to publish it, but to communicate it only to Jesu Navi, who in turn was to reveal it to succeeding high priests under a strict obligation of silence. It was enough to acknowledge, through simple storytelling, now the power of God, now his wrath against the wicked, his mercy toward the good, his justice toward all, and to instruct people through divine and salutary commands to live blessed and well, and to worship in the true religion. But to openly show to people the hidden mysteries and secret intentions of the highest divinity that lie concealed under the hard shell of the law and the rough vesture of language. What could this be other than to throw holy things to the dogs and to cast pearls before swine? Therefore, to keep hidden from the public things that are to be communicated only to the initiate, among whom alone, as Paul says, wisdom speaks, was not human counsel, but divine command. This custom the ancient philosophers most scrupulously observed. Pythagoras wrote nothing but a few trifles which he confided to his daughter Dharma on his deathbed. The sphinxes carved on the temples of the Egyptians warned that the mystic doctrines must be guarded inviolate from the profane multitude, tied into knots of riddles. Plato, in certain writings to Dionysus concerning the highest substances, says, "It is stated in riddles, lest perchance the letter should fall into the hands of others, and others should understand what I write to you." Aristotle used to say that the books of metaphysics, in which he deals with divine matters, were both published and unpublished. What more? Origen asserts that Jesus Christ, the teacher of life, revealed many things to his disciples which they were unwilling to write down, lest they become the common possession of the crowd. Dionysius the Areopagite confirms this most powerfully when he writes that the innermost mysteries were transmitted by the founders of our religion ek noes vov diames of logos, that is, from mind to mind, without writing, through the medium of the spoken word alone. Because the true interpretation of the law given to Moses was, by God's command, revealed in almost precisely this way, it was called Kabbalah, which in Hebrew means the same as our word reception. For this reason, of course, that the doctrine was received by one man from another, not through written records, but as a hereditary right, so to speak, through a regular succession of revelations. In truth, after the Hebrews had been delivered from the Babylonian captivity by Cyrus, and once under Zerubbabel the temple had been restored, they applied themselves to restoring the law. Esdras, then the head of the church, after the book of Moses had been amended, readily recognized that, with the exiles, the massacres, the flights and the captivity of the people of Israel, the practice established by the ancients of handing down the doctrines by word of mouth could not be maintained, and that unless they were committed to writing, the divinely bestowed heavenly teachings would be lost, for the memory of them would not long endure. He decided that the wise men then still alive should be convened, and that each should impart to the gathering what he remembered about the mysteries of the law, and that scribes should be employed to render them into 70 volumes, about the number of elders in the Sanhedrin. So that you need not trust me alone on this matter. Listen, fathers, to Esdras himself when he says, "And it came to pass, when the 40 days were filled, that the highest spake, saying, The first that thou hast written publish openly, and let the worthy and the unworthy read it. But keep the 70 last, that thou mayst deliver them only to such as be wise among thy people, for in them is the spring of understanding, the fountain of wisdom, and the stream of knowledge." And I did so. These are the words of Esdras. These are the books of Kabbalistic knowledge. In these books, as Esdras with the clearest voice rightly declares, resides the vein of understanding, that is, the ineffable theology of the supersubstantial deity, the fountain of wisdom, that is, the exact metaphysics of intelligible and angelic forms, and the stream of science, that is, the firmest philosophy concerning nature. Pope Sixtus IV, the immediate predecessor of our present Pope Innocent VIII, under whom we are happy to be living, undertook study and the greatest care that these books should be translated into Latin for the public benefit of our faith, and at the time of his death 3 of them had appeared in Latin. The Hebrews of our day revere these books with such devotion that no one under 40 years of age is allowed to touch them. Having acquired these books at not inconsiderable expense to myself, and having read them with utmost diligence and tireless toil, I saw in them, as God is my witness, not so much the Mosaic as the Christian religion. There is the mystery of the Trinity, the incarnation of the Word, the divinity of the Messiah. There I have read of original sin, of its expiation by the Christ, of the heavenly Jerusalem, of the fall of the demons, of the orders of the angels, of purgatory and the pains of hell. There I have read the same things that we read daily in Paul and Dionysius, Jerome and Augustine. In those aspects, however, which concern philosophy, you hear a straight line to Pythagoras and Plato, whose doctrines bear such close affinity to the Christian faith that our Augustine offered endless thanks to God that the books of the Platonists had fallen into his hands. On the whole, there is almost no point of controversy between the Hebrews and ourselves on which the Hebrews cannot be refuted and convinced from the Kabbalistic writings, so that no corner is left for them to hide in. On this matter I have a witness of the weightiest authority, Antonius Chronicus, a most learned man who, when I was with him at banquet, with his own ears heard Dactylus, a Hebrew scholar in this field, come around to the Christian opinion of the Trinity wholeheartedly. But let me return to our review of the chief points of my disputation. I have also adduced my thoughts on the interpretation of the songs of Orpheus and Zoroaster. Orpheus is read by the Greeks in a text that is almost complete. Zoroaster is known to them in a corrupt version, while in Chaldea he is read in a form more nearly complete. Both are believed to be authors and fathers of ancient wisdom. I shall say nothing about Zoroaster, who is mentioned frequently by the Platonists, and never without the greatest respect, but of Pythagoras. Iamblichus the Chaldean writes that he took the Orphic theology as the model on which he shaped and formed his own philosophy. In fact, it is for this reason that the sayings of Pythagoras are called so sacred, because they derive from the Orphic teachings, and thence, as its first source, has flown the secret doctrine of numbers and whatever else was great and sublime in Greek philosophy. But Orpheus, and this was the case with all the ancient theologians, so wove the mysteries of his doctrines into the fabric of myths, and so wrapped them about in veils of poetry, that anyone reading his hymns might well believe there was nothing to them but fables and the most unadulterated trifles. I want to say this to make it known what a task this was for me, how difficult it was to draw out the hidden meanings of the secret philosophy from the deliberate tangles of riddles and the recesses of fables in which they were lurking, particularly as, in a matter so grave, so obscure and unexplored, I could count on no help from the work and efforts of other interpreters. Yet still like dogs they came after me, barking, claiming that I had accumulated a heap of tiny trifles in order to make an ostentatious display of their sheer number, as if these were not all most ambiguous and controversial questions, fought over fiercely by the principal academies, and as if I had not brought to light many things quite unknown and unsuspected by these very men who now carp at me and believe themselves to be the leaders of philosophy. In fact, I am so far from this fault that I have taken care to confine the discussion to as few chapters as I could. Had I wished, as others are accustomed to do, to divide these questions into their constituent parts and to dismember them, their number would surely have grown innumerable. And to say nothing of the others, who does not know that one of these 900 theses, the one concerning the reconciliation of the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, could have been developed without my arousing suspicion that I was aspiring merely to numbers into 600 or more chapters by enumerating all those points on which others consider these philosophies to differ and I to agree? But certainly, although I speak neither modestly nor conforming to my character, I must speak out, because those who envy me force me to, my detractors force me to. I wanted to give assurance by this contest of mine, not so much that I know many things, but that I know things which many others do not know. But now, most reverend fathers, so that all this may become manifest to you by facts, and so that my long oration may not further stay your desire, excellent doctors, whom I perceive, and not without great pleasure, to be girded and ready for battle, let us now, and may the outcome be fortunate and favourable, as to the sound of trumpets, engage.